Hello Commander players, this is Jumbo Commander and I'm happy to bring you a brand new deck tech that's a little bit budget but very, very powerful. It's Zada Hedron Grinder. Zada Hedron Grinder, 3 in a red for a 3/3 legendary goblin ally that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada Hedron Grinder, copy that spell for each other creature you control that spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So if you have a single spell that goes straight at Zada, it will replicate it, copy to all of your other creatures. And this is the ability we're building around. This is the ability that we can break with tons of value-centric single target instants and sorceries that will cast on Zada and will propagate to the rest of our team. So let's take a look at those Zada-specific spells that we'll get tons of value from. The first up is Crimson Wisps, and this is a very specific category. It's the draw a card category. Crimson Wisps is an underwhelming card. 1 red for an instant, target creature becomes red and gains haste until end of turn, draw a card. It's that draw a card right there that is amazing. And because it says target creature, so you can throw Crimson Wisps at Zada. Say, hey, target creature, Zada, you can become red and gain haste until end of turn and I will draw a card. Okay. Zada says, oh my gosh, there was a single target instant or sorcery coming at me. I'm going to copy it for all of my friends. So if you have 5 other creatures on the battlefield, then suddenly you're drawing 6 cards off of this Crimson Wisps. Ho 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 ho. Let's keep going and see all of the different card draw abilities we have. We have Expedite. Panic. Panic's a little weird because it's older. You draw at the beginning of next turn's upkeep, but there's nothing wrong with, throwing a Panic down and drawing a few cards to try to refill your hand. Renegade Tactics. They can't block, but draw a card. Notice this is a sorcery, a little bit less flexible, but still, it's the draw card that's so important. Spark of Creativity. Not quite draw a card, but exile and play it. That's okay. Next 2 manas, we have Accelerate. Target creature gains haste until end of turn and draw a card. That's just a worse Expedite, but it's good enough to play, trust me. Chaotic Strike. It also has draw a card, but you can flip coins and get +1/+1. I really like this card. Stun. Can't block, draw a card. And then we have the more than 2 mana, Balduvian Rage. Technically only has to cost 1, but we can get huge. And Balduvian Rage is actually going to transition us to our next category. So Balduvian Rage says, target attacking creature gets +X+0 until end of turn. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Okay. Balduvian Rage is at its core a pump spell, and that's going to be the next category of instants and sorceries that we abuse with Zada. These big pump spells, because we're going to be using this category to draw all of these cards, draw tons and tons of cards, and we're going to use these other cards to pump everything up. So Balduvian Rage is just perfect. I mean, for 5 mana, you can give all of your creatures +4/+0, and then next turn draw that many cards. That's insane. That's crazy. I mean, we're just going to see the intense value that we can get when we have Zada and a bunch of dumb creatures on the battlefield. There's one more card in this category, and it costs so much. It costs 3. Target creature attacks this turn if able, draw a card. Again, we're playing it because it has draw a card. This is kind of like a storm deck where we want to keep drawing cards and keep deploying them over and over again. We have a little bit more incidental card draw in Skull Clamp and Grenzo Havoc Razor. We're going to have a lot of small creatures on the battlefield because we're going wide. We're going to put a lot of tokens on the battlefield. We're just going to have a lot of creatures. And so being able to Skull Clamp a few of them away to draw into our action, or having them goad our opponent or play off of our opponent's deck with Grenzo can be very powerful. This is the category where I talk about pump spells, and the quintessential pump spell, Brute Force. 1 red, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Now, Giant Growth is a fine spell, maybe if you're playing limited, but it doesn't really fit in Commander. unless you're pointing it at Zada and it's copying to your entire team. That's like an overrun for 1 red mana. That is some power. But speaking of overrun, overrun gives trample, and that's going to be the next key piece that we need to force damage through. So anything that has trample on it, like this Rush of Adrenaline, will be very valuable. Rush of Adrenaline gives +2/+1 and trample. Going on Titan Strength just pumps the power of that creature like crazy. Reckless Charge gives haste, and again, a big power boost. And by the way, the flashback is very valuable. Brute Strength is a great one because it gives +3/+1 and trample, but from Ether Revolt comes Invigorated Rampage. Same mana cost of 2, but target creature gets +4/+0 and trample. That is a game-ending ability. Keep going, Team or Battle Rage. You combine this with any of these other pump spells and suddenly your team is deadly. Double Strike, and if your power is high enough, this can also give trample. As you can see, we're just doing more and more and more to pump our creatures. We have one last card that's very powerful, and that's Downhill Charge. This card is great. It costs the most at 3 mana, but oh wait, you may sacrifice a mountain rather than pay Downhill Charge's mana cost. Okay, so just boom, sacrifice a mountain and we get to play this for free, and it says target creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of mountains you control. I don't know, guys, we're going to be running quite a few mountains in this deck. I mean, if this is turn 5, you know, I mean, that's pretty generous, but turn 5, we sacrifice a mountain to play this, it, for free, just gives our creatures +4/+0. That's great. Okay, so Downhill Charge can be incredibly powerful as well, both being able to cast it for free and also being able to just give it a ton of power. So notice that's what these all have in common. Boosting the power, and in many cases, giving trample so we can get damage through. Fast mana. Now, I mentioned how this deck works a little bit. We get a lot of card advantage, we put a lot of tokens on the battlefield, we're playing a ton of spells in a single turn as we're sort of alpha striking our opponent. And so having the ability to have flexible mana is going to be very, very important. Now I want to talk about 2 specific mana rocks. That's Fire Diamond and Ruby Medallion. On the surface, they look very similar. Fire Diamond taps for red, and Ruby Medallion makes your red spells cost 1 less to cast. And they can be found in very similar decks. In fact, both of these can be found in the Mono Red Commander Precon product. Now, why is one significantly better than the other? Well, Fire Diamond taps for red, which means that you can still use it to cast artifact spells. A lot of times red decks are really strong in artifacts, and you might just want your Fire Diamond to tap for anything, because Ruby Medallion only affects red spells. But this deck doesn't run a lot of artifacts, but what it does do is want you to cast multiple spells a turn. And that's where Ruby Medallion goes crazy, because it's always a 1 mana cost reduction on every spell. So if you take this into consideration, you cast 3 spells in a turn, getting that 1 less. Then this Ruby Medallion kind of tapped for 3 colorless mana. And that's crazy good. That's super good. Ruby Medallion in a deck that's playing spell after spell after spell after spell can generate tons and tons of mana advantage. That card is amazing in this deck. But I have another deck. I have a deck that's a red artifact focus that I don't like Ruby Medallion in. I would just rather have something that taps for any mana so I can cast my artifact spells. So understanding these 2 mana rocks can help us understand the deck and also when we might want to use each of them. Now, I mentioned that this deck is budget, and it is, but if you want to add a little bit of money, there's some room in this mana ramp category. Consider, please, Chrome Mox. It costs 0, And you have to exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand. But remember, this card fits so well into this strategy because you're going off. You're playing lots of cards in a single turn. And you're going to be really tight on mana. And you're going to have way more spells to play than you do mana. So just imagine you draw a bunch of cards and you draw into a Chrome Mox. And then you can keep going. You can keep casting spells. And the Chrome Mox had a recent reprint in Eternal Masters, so $10 to $15. It's a pretty good card. But one that does break the bank in terms of budget is Mox Diamond. It's up like $75. It's just not budget at all. And to be honest, Zada is not trying to be uber competitive where you're squeezing out every single little bit of ramp that you can with the Mox Diamonds and Chrome Moxen. But I mean, if you have it and you are going off, I mean, it's really cool to just keep going and keep casting spells. And this also allows you to trim your land count down a little bit. They go really well, but they are definitely not a necessity. There are a few spells that are critical for generating a lot of mana. The first one is Battle Hymn. Remember, we are going wide. We're going to have a lot of creatures on the battlefield, creatures that generate more tokens. And so adding a red to our mana pool for each of those creatures is going to be really great. Also, Mana Geyser can generate so much mana, especially in multiplayer games. You know, if you're at a table with 3 other players and they have, I don't know, just 4 or 5 mana tapped, oh my gosh, you've generated 10 mana. That's crazy. So Mana Geyser can get you a lot of red mana and then let you go off, because mana is going to be one of the limiting factors here. This deck is going to stress your mana in very specific turns when you're playing spell after spell after spell, but I don't have a lot of mana rocks to help support this. I would like to propose Plague Myrrh and Iron Myrrh as mana dorks instead of mana rocks. Now the downside is that these can be easily removed. A board wipe can destroy your mana as well as your creatures. That's bad. But the good part is that they are creatures, and that means that if you have an excess of mana, the Zada triggers will apply to these creatures as well, and you can feel free to swing in. Or if you need the mana, you can tap them and maybe generate some advantage as Zada triggers cause you to draw cards off of each of these creatures. Just a little bit more flexibility when it comes to your mana in this deck. We need a little bit of disruption, and so a Chaos Warp can be very good. It can help us get rid of problematic permanents, because if someone keeps us from attacking, we might have an impossible time winning. So Chaos Warp could be really important. But there's the added second ability of Chaos Warping your own Zada and then copying the Chaos Warp for every creature and then trading them in for permanents. Now that's not a very good strategy. We don't have very many permanents in here, but Indomitable Creativity does upgrade a little bit better because it does the same thing. We're going to get rid of all of our creatures on the battlefield, but for each permanent destroyed this way, we reveal until we reveal an artifact or creature and those go into play. Oh my gosh, we can upgrade our stupid 1/1 goblin tokens and turn them into real artifacts and real creatures. And that is a powerful ability. As we go through the creature section of this deck tech, think about Indomitable Creativity in the back of your head about upgrading stupid tokens into real cards. Next up, we have more ways to cheat mana with Pyromancer's Goggles. Oh, it's a mana ramp for 5. No, it doubles those crazy instants and sorceries that we have so many of in this deck. It's just value. Along with doubling, the Strionic Resonator doubles Zada's triggers. So Zada says, hey, spread this instant or sorcery out to all of your creatures. We say no, do that twice. Again, getting things out of control. And if we want to play all of our spells again, Mizzix's Mastery has an excellent overload. For 8 mana, we just take our graveyard and poof, cast it all again. We've had a few new cards from Aether Revolt, and I'm super excited. Karizev's Expertise. 1 red for essentially a threaten effect. It's a sorcery. Gain control of target creature or vehicle until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste until end of turn. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Oh my gosh, you can target Zada. You can gain control of your own Zada. Untap it and gain haste. All right, who cares? You're gaining control of your own creature. But then you can cast a card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. We have so many cards like that. So Karizev will target Zada, and then boom, Zada will make a copy for every creature you have. And then you'll be able to just cast 2-drops over and over and over and over and over again. Karizev's expertise will allow you to go crazy, cheating mana all over the place, getting tons and tons of value, and giving your team haste. Don't forget about that. The last few cards for this section, if you happen to go Goblin Tribal, and it's easy to do so, consider Brightstone Ritual and Skirk Prospector. These will generate you a lot of mana, but only if you have a critical mass of goblins. Clearly the most important creature is Zada, but let's look at the team of massive idiots that are gonna go next to Zada. We have another key creature in Mirror Wing Dragon. It's kind of like another version of Zada in your deck. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Mirror Wing Dragon, the player copies that spell for each other creature he or she controls. That spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So, if you pump your Mirror Wing Dragon, you'll pump your whole team. If your opponent removes Mirror Wing Dragon, that spell will copy to remove every creature he controls. Ooh, I like that. There's a little bit of extra protection that Zada doesn't have. But Zada's in your command zone, so Zada's gonna win. But speaking of protection, we're going to need to protect these key creatures. Because if we're just casting a Rush of Adrenaline and not copying it, or if we're just casting a Crimson Wisps to cycle it, oh, that's bad. That's real bad. Our deck will not function. So we need to protect these creatures. And the Lightning Greaves sucks at it. I'm serious. It's the Shroud, guys. We can't protect these creatures with Shroud because that doesn't let us target them. So instead, this is a case where Swiftfoot Boots is so superior. Swiftfoot Boots gives Hexproof, not Shroud. And so we can equip Mirrorwing Dragon and Zada with the boots and still cast our spells at them. Let's flood the board with creatures so Zada can copy and copy and copy. Dragon Fodder puts on 2 goblins. Krenko's Command puts on 2 goblins. Hordling Outburst puts on 3 goblins. Molten Birth puts on 2 red elementals and has a chance of doing a lot more. Goblin Rally puts on 4 goblins. Love this card. Empty the Warrens. Again, we're gonna kind of storm a little bit. We have tons of low drops, so maybe draw a few cards, cycle a few things, then empty the Warrens for a ton of goblins. But you know what? Just getting 4 goblins is fine. I think that's great. Devil's Playground puts some devils onto the battlefield. Tempt with Vengeance. Oh, I love this card. Puts on so many red elemental creature tokens with haste. And Goblin Slide. Yes, this is the deck for Goblin Slide if you ever wanted to play it. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can pay 1 extra and then put a Goblin creature token with haste onto the battlefield. Yes, we want to make tons of tokens and go super wide. Twin Flame and Heat Shimmer are insane. They basically double your creatures for a single attack, and that's what we're going for, a single big attack. Heat Shimmer reads, put a token into play that's a copy of target creature. It has haste, and you remove the permanent from the game, at the end of the turn, whatever. But the most important part is it targets. So you target Zada, and then your Heat Shimmer goes to every creature, and every creature then makes a copy of itself for 1 turn and 1 turn only for massive, crazy attacks. Oh my gosh, Twin Flame and Heat Shimmer, you go crazy doubling up your creatures. I love it. I'm going to go through a bunch of goblins that do a great job of putting more goblins onto the battlefield. Beat a Black Chief puts 2 red goblins on the battlefield. Chancellor Forge can start off with 1 and then double your goblin count. Ib Halfheart Goblin Tactician can put some more goblins on the battlefield at the cost of mountains. Legion Loyalist doesn't actually put extra goblins, but it's very important. I'm going to read this card for this deck. Okay, it has haste, which is very good when you're trying to go off. You want hasty creatures, but more importantly, it has battalion. Whenever it and at least 2 other creatures attack, they gain first strike. Ooh, I like that. When you're buffing your creatures up like this, first strike is very good, but also trample, and they can't be blocked by creature tokens this turn. Wow, that's a great combination of abilities just for a 1-drop. I love the trample. We need that in this deck. Let's keep going with the goblins. We have Krenko Mob Boss. Even if we're not going Goblin Tribal, Krenko Mob Boss is worth it, being able to double up a few of these token creators. Mog War Marshal just puts a couple easy goblins on the battlefield. Goblin Rabblemaster does 1 a turn, and it can get out of control. And last in this category, we have Siege Gang Commander, the best of the best, 5 mana, and puts 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens on the battlefield. We can now imagine the army that Zada will be pumping, right? I mean, it's just goblin tokens everywhere. We're not even done. We're going to talk about a few more tokens because we're not discriminating. We're going to put red human creature tokens on the battlefield. Or Eldrazi. By the way, I like the Eldrazi a lot because you can sacrifice them to keep storming off and keep playing more and more spells. Let's keep going. Let's go Pia Kiran Nalaar or just Pia Nalaar. Okay? We can put lots and lots of different stuff into this deck. We just want to go wide so that we get the most out of our Zada. If our plan is to go wide with a lot of creatures, why not just destroy our opponent with Purphoros, God of the Forge? Now this is another expensive inclusion, but you can see how well worth this god is. Basically, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. And you can pump your whole team for 3 mana. Now, Purphoros throwing damage all over the place as you cast more and more tokens can get really out of control. I mean, Siege Gang Commander does 8 damage to each one of your opponents. So that simple combination can just get out of hand. Similarly, Impact Tremors can do this incidental damage. Remember, we're going to be ultimately dealing combat damage. We're going to be trying to force damage through with Zada in order to win this game. So a little bit of incidental Impact Tremors or Purphoros damage, lowering our opponent's life total, is going to be really valuable. And maybe we can pick them off with a Goblin Bombardment, just sacrificing a few of those creature tokens at the end to finish someone off. This deck is very spell-centric. All of the things that target Zada are instants and sorceries, and many of our creature production, those Krenko's commands and Molten Births, are all instants and sorceries as well. So we can abuse those spells by having spell-centric creatures. Goblin Dark Dwellers will help us flash something back. Gutter Snipe does that incidental damage that we need to lower our opponent's life total. Charmbreaker Devils are just fun. I like getting cards back. I like making crazy pumpable devils. Dual Caster Mage can offer some protection, but also copy a very critical spell. I mean, just think of a Brute Strength or, Crimson Wisps, something like that. And Young Pyromancer is great because we want to go wide already, so why not add some more red elementals to the mix? Let's keep attacking! This is an aggro deck at heart, so even our lands have to do some attacking. Mutavault is a great inclusion. Its opportunity cost is very, very low. It comes into play untapped, and it just doesn't produce colored mana. If we tap Mutavault, we can activate it, turning it into a creature. Now, what good is a tapped creature? But with Zada on the battlefield, tapped creatures can still draw us cards. Tapped creatures can still generate mana. By the way, Mutavault is great because it's technically a goblin, and so it will work with Brightstone Ritual. But there's tons of reasons to just have a tapped creature on the battlefield. And later on, if we flood out or if we have some extra mana, we can activate Mutavault and then swing in with it. I mean, remember, this is an aggro deck, so we want to make sure that our lands are useful and we don't flood out with them. So along with Mutavault, we can take into account cards like Blinkmoth Nexus, Mishra's Factory, Inkmoth Nexus. All of these are going to be great cards that do something very similar. We don't want to go too heavy because we will need so much red mana. And it does detract from a card like Downhill Charge that uses mountains for our advantage. But Downhill Charge is the kind of card that will make an Inkmoth Nexus lethal on its own. Another thing to keep in the back of your head is that Inkmoth Nexus is very expensive, and it doesn't even add anything to this deck. You're going to be very unlikely to poison someone out with it. So if you want to include it, I think it'd be fun, but don't feel like it's necessary. It's really expensive. Save the money right there in that card. All right, that was Zada Hedron Grinder, and I've got to say, I'm really excited about this deck, especially how it plays. It plays like so many different decks. I mean, if you like token decks, or if you like Spellslinger decks, or combo decks, or storm decks, or aggressive decks, Zada's got a little bit of each of that all rolled into one great package that is really, really synergistic. And I have to say, another really big draw to playing Zada in this deck specifically is that its budget. It's very inexpensive. And I know. Sometimes when you're given a budget deck, it just feels cheap. But the ideal build of Zada is just inexpensive. A lot of the cards that we want to be playing with, those pump spells, those card draw spells, those generate stupid 1/1 goblin spells, they're all, 10 cents, 25 cents. It's just an inexpensive deck. And so I would love to see some people that want some interesting and interactive gameplay pick up a Zada EDH deck and really, really enjoy yourself. I want to thank you all for watching this deck tech. I am Jumbo Commander, and I'm putting out new content every Wednesday. So if you'd like to see more of it, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're interested in talking to me or anything, feel free to comment, and I'd love to chat. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later.